Good evening, Doc and classmates. I'm Grace Villaraya, and tonight I'll be discussing the Systemic Functional Linguistics and Register. Systemic Functional Linguistics, or SFL, is a theory of language and discourse developed by Michael Halliday and his followers. Systemic in SFL refers to a conception of language as a network of systems or choices for expressing meaning. Functional refers to a concern for what language does and how it does it, in contrast to more structural approaches. Halliday began to develop his theory in the 1960s. He was influenced by the British linguist Firth, his teacher, from whom he inherited the notions of language as a set of systems and the importance of context in the interpretation of meaning. Malinowski, a social anthropologist, also had an important impact on Halliday, with his emphasis on the relation between language and context. That is, his idea that you need to be in the particular context to understand the meaning of an utterance, and his notion of multiplicities of language according to situations. Another influence on Halliday was the American linguist Worth, who also insisted on how language was influenced by environment. Another body of work drawn upon by Halliday was that of Danish linguist Hemslev and his notion of language as the level of expression of a higher level semiotic system. A final influence on Halliday was the functional approach of Prague's School of Linguistics, especially with regard to the textual metafunction. A functional perspective on child language acquisition. Through a diary study of his child, Nigel, Halliday, 1975, developed a theory of language development. The first stage of Nigel's language learning is described by Halliday as a proto-language. This is when Nigel developed a small set of words which he developed to express certain functions. The proto-words that made up this set were not learned from the social environment, but came from Nigel himself. Words such as da, na, a, and ye. These words were discovered to perform particular functions, of which Halliday identified 6 as follows. First, instrumental, to obtain goods or services, the I want function. Second, regulatory, to control the behavior of others, the do as I tell you function. Third, interactional, to interact with others, the me and you function. And fourth, personal, to express the personality of the child, the here I come function. Fifth, heuristic, to explore and learn about the environment, the tell me why function. And number 6, imaginary, to create the child's own environment, the let's pretend function. Later, a seventh function is added to the child's repertoire, the informative function, the I've got something to tell you function. Halliday explains the development of the proto-language as follows. A child begins by creating a proto-language of his own, a meaning potential in respect of each of the social functions that constitute his developmental semiotic, according to Halliday, 1978. As the various functions of the proto-language develop, so does the need for a language code through which they can be expressed. The text and situation by which the child is surrounded is filtered through his own functional semantic grid, so the processes just as much of it as can be interpreted in terms of his own meaning potential at the same time. In this way, with gradually increasing degrees of sophistication, language forms come to be attached to the meaning that the child wishes to express. As the child begins to be involved in more and more complex social relations, so do the demands grow greater, and so does the language system increase to cope with them. Let's proceed to the systemic functional linguistics. The term functional is in opposition to formal, that is, language is construed as a practical means of expressing meanings rather than as an abstract set of relations, which is the approach of many other schools of linguistics, in particular Chomskyan generative grammar. SFL views grammar and lexis or vocabulary as working together in making meanings. This combination is referred to as lexicogrammar. Figure 2.1 is a systems network for mood, the system of verb forms used to indicate the speaker's attitude toward a statement in the English class. SFL views grammar and lexis or vocabulary as working together in making meanings. Lexicogrammar. According to SFL, meanings are expressed according to the three broad metafunctions. These are ideational, interpersonal, and textual. The ideational metafunction is concerned with things real or imagined in the world. It is to do with actions, events, and states referred to as processes. For example, run, occur, be verbs. Participants in those processes, for example, he, man, car, weather, and the circumstances in which those processes occur, that is, how, when, and where. It is divided into two components. The experiential component, it has to do with the experience and understanding of the world. And the logical component, it has to do with logical relations. The interpersonal function has to do with relationships between participants, not only in spoken text but also in written text. With regard to how the writer interacts with the reader, the textual metafunction relates to the construction of text, how it is held together, and what gives it texture. It is important to note that the three metafunctions are not independent of each other and that any stretch of language expresses or realizes the three functions simultaneously. Certain linguistic features are more typically expressive of one of the functions than the others. Lexis is typically associated with ideational meanings, while modal verbs are associated with interpersonal. Conjunctions are associated with textual metafunction. Ideational meanings realize what is called the field of discourse, the purpose of the communication, and what it is about. Interpersonal meanings realize what is called the tenor, the relations between the participants in the text. And textual meanings realize what is referred to as the mode, how the language is organized and functions in the interaction. For example, whether it is written or spoken or some combination of the two. Figure 2.1 is a systems network for mood, the system of verb forms used to indicate the speaker's attitude toward a statement in the English class. Let's have register. In any given context of situation, a certain set of contextual parameters comes together in what is called a register. Halliday and Hasson accordingly define register as a configuration of meanings that are typically associated with a particular situational configuration of field, mode, and tenor. To put it more simply, register is a set of linguistic choices associated with a particular situation. These situations are usually related to professional activity, the language of teachers, doctors, students, and so forth. Register is identified according to tenor, the relations between the participants. Level of formality is a primary distinction, colloquial and formal registers being differentiated, although they are related on a client rather than as distinct categories. Tenor relations may be more or less permanent. The relationship between a husband and wife is fairly permanent one, at least traditionally. Causal encounters are likely to vary with the situation. An encounter at a party is likely to be informal, while one in an office is likely to be more formal. Some relationships are socially defined, such as that between teacher and pupil and that between doctor and patient. Some relationships are directly encoded in the language. The two vowels distinction of many languages is determined according to the formality of the relationship. Some languages, such as Japanese, reserve certain grammatical forms for men and others women. As for mode, the primary distinction here is between spoken and written, but within this primary classification, there can be subdivisions into, for example, literature, newspaper, and advertising for written registers, and casual conversation, informal interview, and sports commentary for spoken registers. There are also registers which blur the spoken or written distinction, for example, plays which are written to be spoken or political speeches which are written to be read aloud. Registers labeled at a higher level of classification can be further subclassified. Thus, literature can be broken down into prose and verse. The news register can be broken down into report, editorial writing, and features writing. We have lexicogrammar. In order to come up with lexicogrammatical specifications of registers, it is necessary to be familiar with the descriptive apparatus of SFL with reference to a very short text. This section will map out what might be considered to be the most important features of this apparatus from a discourse analytic point of view. Given the limited space, a lot more will be left out than can be included, but a flavor of the approach can still be given. At this point, a warning is perhaps warranted that there is rather a lot of terminology to grasp in SFL description. This is off-putting, it must be admitted, for some people, especially as traditional grammatical categories are often replaced by new ones. The rationale for this, however, is to emphasize the functional, semantic, meaning-focused approach to description. The labels refer to semantic phenomena, whereas the labeling of traditional grammar is more focused on form. Table 2.2 shows contextual parameters and associated lexicogrammar for the biology lecture register. In order to exemplify the various lexicogrammatical features of English as they relate to the contextual parameters of field, tenor, and mode, and to the ideational, interpersonal, and textual metafunctions, we will be using this short science text. Let me read this children's text for you. My favorite pet. My favorite pet is my parrot. Him, Parrot. He is an African gray. We got him about 5 years ago. He has a gray body and a red tail. His beak is very sharp and he can bite you. He can say lots of words like hello, how are you today, and who's a pretty boy then. He hasn't got a name. We just call him Parrot. Features related to field and the ideational function, the lexis. The first thing to note with respect to field is how the lexis relates semantically to the topic of the text. My parrot, that is to say, my favorite pet, my parrot, an African gray, a gray body, a red tail, his beak very sharp, can bite. Lexis is the most obvious way to recognize the field of any text. We have the rank hierarchy. SFL works with a hierarchy of units or ranks as follows: clause complex, clause, group, word. Each of these units consists of one or more of the units below it. Thus, a group consists of one or more words, a clause consists of one or more groups, and a clause complex consists of one or more clauses. SFL does not use the term sentence in this hierarchy, considering sentence to be part of the system of orthography writing rather than grammar. Let us take an example clause complex from our sample text. His beak is very sharp and he can bite you. This is a clause complex consisting of two clauses connected by and as follows. Clause 1, his beak is very sharp. Clause 2, he can bite you. If we consider the composition of these clauses, we see that the first one, his beak is very sharp, consists of three groups. A nominal group, his beak. A verbal group is an adjectival group, very sharp. We see that the first of these groups consists of two words, the second of just one word, and the third of two words. In the second clause, he can bite you, we have the following breakdown. Again, here's the second clause and the breakdown. He can bite you. In nominal group, he, a verbal group, can bite a second nominal group, you. Here is quite an extreme example consisting of 44 words from a book on linguistics by Thibault, 2004. Complex nominal group were underlined. I conclude that language and other semiotic modalities emerge from the primordial many degrees of freedom of the prior sensor-motor-based modalities of semiosis which constitute our earlier, always embodied, always semiotically mediated transactions with the topological richness and variety of the physical material processes and flows of the world in which we are immersed. Let's have the clauses. The clause is the basic unit of analysis in SFL. A clause is made up of processes expressed as verbal groups, participants expressed as nominal groups, and circumstances expressed as adverbial groups or prepositional phrases. These functional labels indicating the role of each element in the clause, that is to say, processes involve participants in certain circumstances. The following is our sample text broken down into clauses. Number 1, my favorite pet is my parrot. Number 2, he is an African gray. Number 3, we got him about 5 years ago. Number 4, he has a gray body and a red tail. Number 5, his beak is very sharp. And number 6, he can bite you. Number 7, he can say lots of words like hello, how are you today, and who's a pretty boy then. Number 8, he hasn't got a name. Number 9, we just call him Parrot. Most of the clauses in this simple text consist of two participants and a process. For example, the first two clauses can be labeled as follows. Participant, my favorite pet. Process is participant, my parrot. For the second clause, participant, he, then the process, then process is, then another participant, an African gray. There is always a process in any clause and usually one or more participants. The final clause in our sample text has three participants. Participant, we, process, call, participant, him, participant, parrot. The fifth clause is the only clause in our sample text to contain a circumstance. Circumstances are optional elements in the clause. Participant, we, process, got, participant, him, circumstance about 5 years ago. The process element of a clause may be finite, that is to say, it is marked for tense and takes a subject, or non-finite, that is, it is not marked for tense and does not take a subject. All of the clauses in our sample text are finite. Non-finites are associated more with more complex and more adult registers. Let's now have process types. Transitivity. Transitivity in traditional grammar refers to whether a verb is transitive or intransitive, the former taking a direct object and the latter not. Transitivity in SFL, however, is much broader than this. It concerned with the whole clause, not just the verb. It includes the different types of processes involved, their relations to the roles of the participants, and how the processes, roles, and circumstances relate one to another. When we analyze the roles of the participants, the processes, and the circumstances in a text, we can see the relationships between the people and the things involved, the processes they engage in, and the sort of circumstances in which they occur. There are 6 process types: relational, material, verbal, mental, existential, existential, and behavioral, only the first three of which occur in our sample text. Relational process clauses. Relational process clauses are to do with being and existing. The most common relational process verb by far is the verb be, although other verbs may also express states of being and existing, such as seem, look, become, and have. The participants in relational process clauses depend on whether the relational process clause is identifying or attributive. In identifying relational process clauses, the participants are identifier, which usually precedes the verb, and identified, which usually follows the verb. The obligatory participant in attributive relational process clauses is the carrier, which comes before the verb. The verb is followed by an attribute, which may be an adjectival or nominal group. For example, my favorite pet is my parrot. Identifier there is my favorite pet. Then the relational process is then identified my parrot. We have attributive clauses. The carrier, for the first clause, he has a gray body and a red tail. The carrier there is he. Relational process has attribute a gray body and a red tail. Another clause, his beak is very sharp. Carrier, his beak. Relational process is attribute very sharp. Another clause, he hasn't got a name. Carrier, he. Relational process is has not got, and attribute a name. A way to differentiate attributive and identifying clauses is that with the latter, it is possible to reverse the participants. For example, my favorite pet is my parrot, and my parrot is my favorite pet are both possible. With the attributive type, this is not the case. Material process clauses. They contain verbs of doing. They are about actions performed. Typical material process verbs are run, jump, arrive, leave, eat, and drink. Material process clauses have an actor as participant and may have a goal as a second participant. There are two material process verbs in our sample text, got and bite. We have here two clauses. For the first clause, the actor is we, got is the material process, him is goal, then circumstance about 5 years ago. Another clause, he can bite you. The actor is he, material process bite, and goal you. Let's have verbal process clauses. They refer to processes of saying. The participants are sayer, receiver, verbiage. We have two examples of a verbal process clause in the parrot text. He can say lots of words and we just call him parrot. We have here two clauses. We can say lots of words like hello, how are you today, and who's pretty boy then. Sayer, we, verbal process say, so receiver, none, and verbiage, lots of words, etc. Then the second clause, we call him parrot. Sayer, we, verbal process call, receiver, him, then the verbiage, parrot. We have mental process clauses. Mental processes are to do with thinking and feeling with things that go on in the mind. Typical mental process verbs are think, feel, see, believe, want, and like. In addition to the verb, mental processes clauses may contain two participants, a sensor and a phenomenon. There are no clauses of this type in our sample text. So here are some made-up examples. I can't see my keys. That's the clause. The sensor there is I. Mental process can't see or see. Then the phenomenon, my keys. Then for the second clause, his outstanding personality impresses me. Phenomenon is his outstanding personality. Then mental process impresses. Then the sensor, me. We have existential process clauses. Existential process clauses are clauses referring to existence which are introduced by the empty category there, usually with the verb be. Existential process clauses contain only one participant, the existent. There are no existential process clauses in our example text, so here's and made up one. As you can see, the clause "there is a dark in the corner" has only one participant, the existent a desk. Let's move on to behavioral process clauses. The behavioral process category is intermediate between material and mental, such processes incorporating elements of both types of meaning. Examples include watch, listen, laugh, and cry. Here's an example. He stared out of the window. Behavior, he. Behavioral process, stared. No behavior and circumstance, out of the window. For the second clause, behavior, she. Behavioral process, breathed. Behavior, a sigh of relief. No circumstance. We have the features related to tenor and the interpersonal function, person, modality, and mood. So far, we have been talking about field as realized through the ideational metafunction and how it relates to our sample text. Let us now turn to the tenor as expressed through the interpersonal metafunction, that is, the personal relationships involved in a text between writer or speaker and reader or listener, and in our sample text in particular. The relationship in our sample text here is one of school pupil to teacher. The school pupil is telling the teacher about his parrot. We can note that although this is a description, it is quite personalized with the use of first-person pronouns. My favorite pet, we got him, we just call him. Also, one second-person pronoun. He can bite you. Descriptive text is not usually personalized like this, certainly not in academic context. One feature of more sophisticated descriptive registers, for example, science textbooks, that this primary school text does have, however, is the near absence of modal verbs. Modal verbs such as might, must, may, can, and should are used to express our attitude to what we are saying, to indicate how confident or not we are about the truth of what we are saying. In our text, there are two modal verbs. If he can bite you, and he can say lots of words. However, this is more expressive of the parrot's ability, not the writer's attitude towards what he is saying. The paucity of modal verbs in our text indicates that the school pupil is confident about what he is telling his teacher and at the same time makes the text less personalized. This impersonality is further reinforced by the mood of the text, by the fact that it only has declarative clauses. There are no interrogatives except for the reported interrogatives of the parrot or imperative. Let's have features related to mode and the textual metafunction, cohesion, theme, and thematic development. When we consider the mode and textual metafunction of a text in terms of lexicogrammar, we are concerned with the linguistic features which hold the text together and give it its characteristic texture. First, we can consider the cohesion, the links between the clauses. In our sample text, we find that cohesion is created primarily through the use of personal pronouns and the possessive pronouns, he and his, to refer to the parrot. In fact, we can note a chain of such items relating back to my parrot in the first clause as follows. My parrot, he, him, he, his, he, him. After cohesion, we can consider theme and thematic development. Theme is the point of departure of a clause, what the clause is about, while thematic development refers to the pattern of themes across the stretch of text. We see that the parrot or a body part of the parrot referred to respectively as he or his in our text is made the theme of most of the sentences in order to maintain attention on what being described. Here's the summary of analysis of the parrot text, the contextual parameters and lexicogrammar of the parrot text. In order to see how SFL analysis can identify distinctions in registers, let us now look at another text, Figure 2.3, from a similar yet different register. This text is taken from some notes for students of elementary biology, not at primary school level, as in the parrot text, but at secondary level. If we conduct a similar analysis on this text as we did for the parrot text, we can highlight the similarities and differences of this more advanced register. The title is The Iris. This is a short biology text about the iris. So let me read this to you. The iris is a circular colored structure located in the front of the eye. In the center of the iris is small called the pupil. The iris is made up of radial muscles that conduct to dilate the pupil and relax to make the pupil smaller. The function of the iris is to regulate the amount of light that enters the eye by contracting or dilating the pupil. Embedding is a process which allows for the addition of an element to a group which is from a higher or sometimes lower level until or rank, sometimes also called down ranking or rank shifting. To exemplify this, Holiday 2004 gives the following made-up example, where expression is the congruent form and expression is its rewarding with grammatical metaphor. The driver drove the bus too rapidly down the hill so that brakes failed. Letter B, the driver's over rapid downhill driving of the bus resulted in brake failure. This example does not sound very scientific in either of the two forms, but B, because of the grammatical metaphor, nominalization perhaps sounds more specific than letter A. Holiday also provides some authentic examples, some of which are presented as follows. A practical learning activity to deal with this issue is to practice unpacking and repacking clauses which contain embedding and grammatical metaphor. Returning to the iris text, we can note that in spite of the greater complexity of the clauses, the process type employed are similar to those of the parrot text. As in the parrot text, the majority of the processes in the iris text are relational. Is made up of is. The second most frequent type, as in the parrot text again, is material processes: contract, dilate, relax, regulate, enters. This similarity is a register feature of field to do with the fact that both texts are talking about structure, relational processes, and function, material process. Let's now move on to tenor and the interpersonal function and mode and the textual function. We can also note some register-specific features of the iris text as compared to the parrot text in the tenor and mode contextual parameters in their interpersonal and textual counterparts. Considering first the tenor or interpersonal dimension, we noted that the parrot text was for the most part impersonal, but with some use of first-person pronouns. The iris text, on the other hand, is completely impersonal. There are no first or second person pronouns, only third person ones. This subtle difference in tenor interpersonal function between the two texts is indicative of the different relationship between writer and reader in the expertise of the textbook writer compared to the novice-like writing of the school pupil. Turning now how to mode textual function, whereas in the parrot text, cohesion was created by the use of personal pronouns and adjectives. In the iris text, it is created primarily by lexical repetition. The nominal groups, the pupil, and the iris are each mentioned 4 times in the iris text. Lexical repetition like this is a common feature of scientific writing, whereas in other types of writing, we may be encouraged to avoid repetition and to strive for what is sometimes referred to as elegant variation, according to Fowler and Fowler 1973. In scientific writing, clarity is considered more important than style. The school pupil writer of the parrot text has clearly not learned this convention of scientific writing yet. Another feature of mode or textual function in the iris text, which is not present in the parrot text, is the use of marked theme. In the iris text, iris is made the theme of each of the sentences to maintain attention on what is being discussed, just as parrot or a part of the parrot is the theme of clauses of the parrot text. However, in the second clause of the iris text, a pattern is employed with the circumstance in the center of the iris being played an initial position. Such use of marked themes is a typical feature of scientific textbook register, especially in descriptions of structure where attention is drawn to particular structure part. Here is the summary of analysis of the iris text. Contextual parameters and lexicogrammar of iris text. Contextual parameter, field biology, tenor, teacher to student impersonal, mode, written to be read, descriptive and didactic. For lexicogrammar, field related to biological lexis, relational process clauses, verbs of being and existing and material, process clauses, verbs of doing and happening. Then third person, no modal forms, all clauses declarative. Lexical repetition, theme pattern, one example of marked theme, complex nominal group, one case of nominalization, embedded clauses. Let's now move on to conversion as register. We will draw for our account primarily on Eggins and Slade 2005, Halliday and Matheson 2004, Martin 1992, and Thornberry and Slade 2006. Halliday's model of speech exchange is based on two pairs of variables. Table 2.5 is about giving or demanding goods and services or information by Halliday and Matheson 2004. Role in exchange, giving, demanding. Commodity exchange, goods and services. Offer for giving, would you like this pen? Then for demanding, command, give me that pen. Then information, for giving, statement, he's giving her the pen. And for demanding, question, what is he giving her? Here is another table that shows speech functions and responses, Halliday and Matheson 2004. Initiating speech function, offer, command, statement, question. Then supporting, responding speech functions, supporting, acceptance, compliance, acknowledgement, answer. Then for confronting, rejection, refusal, contradiction, disclaimer. It is also worth noting how the responding speech functions may echo the initiation with a part of the verbal group called an operator. For example, do, don't, does, doesn't, will, won't, can, can't, has not, as in, are you having a coffee? Yes, I am. Halliday's model of speech function has been applied and developed by Eggins and Slade 2005. Eggins and Slade use the term move to refer to speech functional units. A move is typically realized as a speaker turn a talk, but often a single turn may consist of more than one move in a move complex. We can see in this table that there is one rather lengthy turn which is broken down into separate moves which together make up an acknowledgement move. It must be said, however, that the boundaries of such moves are often difficult to identify. For example, the final exchange has been added as a question and answer, but it might be argued that the question is not one move but two, given that there are two separate questions here. Okay, so what? What changed your mind? What changed your mind? And what has it been changed to? One feature which can help in recognizing discourse boundaries is rhythm and intonation. Speakers are able to speed up and slow down in order to control the turns in an interaction. Thus, a decision as to whether the two questions mentioned above make up one move or two might be decided by whether the speaker runs on from one to the other or creates a pause. Although we do not have detailed prosodic information for our transcript from the Mikase corpus. The corpus transcript does indicate where longer pauses occur. Given that no pause is indicated here, the decision can be made to count it on as one move. Let's have the Sinclair and Coulthard's model of classroom interaction. In the 1970s, two linguists in Birmingham in the UK, Sinclair and Coulthard, directed a research project analyzing classroom interaction in English primary schools. Sinclair and Coulthard were interested in seeing if Holliday's rank hierarchy for grammatical analysis could be extended to classroom discourse. In Holliday's model of speech functions, initiation, would you like a chocolate? Then response, yes, please. Sinclair and Coulthard noticed, however, that in their classroom data, exchanges are made up of 3 units, which, anticipating Eggins and Slade 2005, they referred to as moves. An initiation, a response, and a follow-up, as in, initiation, what's the capital of France? Response, Paris. Follow-up, right. The pattern is predominant in classrooms because the interaction is constrained with the display of information. Teachers ask questions to which they already know the answer. Pupils respond with the required information, and teachers follow up with confirmation to pupils as to whether they are right or not. The following examples of three-part exchange is from Sinclair and Coulthard's data. Initiation, what makes a road slippery? Response, you might have rain or snow on it. Follow up, yes, snow, ice. Phonological contractions and assimilations, hesitations, false starts and failed pauses, repetition, sentence fragments rather than complete sentences, structured according to prosodic features rather than clauses, high incidence of discourse, markers at the beginning or end of tone groups. Phonological contractions and assimilations, hesitations, false starts and failed pauses, repetition, sentence fragments rather than complete sentences, structured according to prosodic features rather than clauses, high incidence of discourse markers at the beginning or end of tone groups, relatively frequent use of questions and imperatives, first and second person pronouns, deixis, reference outside the text, this, that, here, there. Linguistic features of written text, on the other hand, are longer information units, complete clauses and sentences, complex relations of coordination and subordination, high incidence of attributive adjectives, wider range and more precise choice of vocabulary than in speech, high degree of nominalizations, longer average word length, greater use of passive voice. Here is a comparison of some spoken written text types, adapted by McCartney and Slade 2007, 860. Let's proceed to lexical density. One way of contrasting the relative complexity of speech and writing is in terms of lexical density. Lexical density is a statistical measure of the relative frequency of lexical words and grammatical words in a stretch of texts. The category of lexical words, also referred to as content words, includes nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. Grammatical words, also referred to as function words, include determiners, pronouns, prepositions, conjunctions, numerals, and auxiliary verbs. Lexical density as the ratio of lexical words to the total number of words. Example, if a stretch of text has, say, 60 lexical items and 40 grammatical items, the ratio of lexical items to the total 100 words is 60% or 0.6, which is the lexical density depending upon how you want to express it. Halliday provides two sets of wordings that are paraphrases of each other, one typical of writing and the other of speech. The written versions of these paraphrases are characterized by nominals: visit, sense, futility, action, violence, improvements, costs, installation, opinion, change, enthusiasm. The spoken versions are characterized by verbs: had visited, had ended up feeling, tried to do, had been, has improved, install, doesn't cost, rejoice, change. Both sets of paraphrases represent different types of complexity. Let's have appraisal, developed by Martin and White, Martin and White 2005. Appraisal or appraisal theory is an attempt to develop the minutiae of the interpersonal function. Appraisal is concerned with the ways we express our views and react to the views of others. It can be identified at the level of the word or group. There are three systems in appraisal: graduation, attitude, and engagement. Here's the formula for lexical density. Lexical density is equal to lexical words divided by total words times 100. Appraisal, the graduation. Graduation is concerned with grading and scaling the interpersonal force attaching to utterances. There are two subsystems: force, which is to do with intensity of interpersonal force, slightly, somewhat, very, completely; and focus, which concerns the precision of our interpersonal focus. I kind of like this. This is the genuine article. This table shows the written and spoken paraphrases by Halliday, 1989. One system under appraisal is attitude, to do with how speakers and writers express their attitude towards people and phenomena. It has three subsystems: affect, which refers to emotional attitude, I love or hate you; judgment, which refers to evaluation of behavior, she played very well, badly; and appreciation, which relates to the evaluation of objects and products in terms of their aesthetic or other value. He played a beautiful shot, that's really dangerous place. Engagement is how we express our commitment to what is stated in what we say or write. It has four subsystems: disclaiming, in which we distance ourselves from what has been said or written. It is a that, I deny that. Proclamation, where we assert that something is true. It is true that, I must say that. Acknowledgement, where we acknowledge a range of possibilities. It is a possible that, it seems that. And attribution, through which we report something that has been said or written. Scientists have discovered that, according to Smith, 2000. Hallidayan theory and SFL in general have been critiqued on a number of counts. Most of these are rather technical. And first, from the point of view of the student, from the point of view of the applied practitioner, many find the terminology of putting, as already mentioned, and not always intuitive. The counter-argument, as already mentioned again, is that the labels are semantic ones, which point to the functional value of the categories. In addition, using only traditional terms restricts us to talking about only certain areas of grammar. A huge number of grammatical features that often cause severe problems for learners are simply ignored in traditional grammar because there is no meta-language for talking about them, especially, for example, in the area of transitivity. Halliday has always been concerned with applied issues. He refers to his model as applicable linguistics, and the research center set up in his name in 2005 at City University of Hong Kong is called the Halliday Center for Intelligent Applications of Language Studies, as well as co-authoring the linguistic sciences and language teaching. Halliday was director of two influential curriculum development projects in the UK in 1960s and early 1970s. Both of these projects, Breakthrough to Literacy at Primary Level and Language in Use for Secondary Schools, were very influential in reforming the teaching of English in British school system. Fundamental to these projects was the concept of register, as set out in the linguistic sciences and language teaching, and the need for the child to be taught the varieties of language appropriate to different situations, the range and use of its registers and restricted languages. Halliday et al. 1964. Halliday theory was very influential in the Council of Europe's Common European Framework project for language teaching, and his model of acquisition underpins the basic theory of communicative language teaching. Halliday's theory of register can be seen to underpin the development of the English for specific purposes movement. The concept of register is situated variety of language being fundamental to that movement. That ends my report. Thank you for listening.